So who exactly is Flashback Man? For those who forgot, and honestly I don't blame you, Flashback Man is a character who first appeared in the first arc of Jojolion, which is the soft and wet arc. More accurately, the fight against Fun. This is chapter 5, titled Soft and Wet Part 4. And this is when Josuke got hit by a bunch of snakes from his opponent upstairs, who we later found out is Ojiro. During this attack, Josuke suddenly remembered this man, who he doesn't have an official name, but is just known as Flashback Man for now. Alright, let's analyze these few panels. The first thing we can see is that Flashback Man's appearance is the best in the entirety of JoJo. Like, this is the peak of JoJo designs, except maybe this guy. So, Flashback Man has long hair and this really interesting looking jacket. Just remember that these colors aren't really canon, and that we don't really know the actual colors of his hair or his shirt, sweater, jacket looking thing. However, at the very back you can notice my Twitter and Discord in the description down below. Now, what exactly is the identity of Flashback Man? Well, this design is actually very similar to our first theory that we will discuss, and that is George Joestar III. This George Joestar is the son of Johnny Joestar. George has the exact same clothes as this guy, and his hair also just seems to be like a shorter version of the Flashback Man. However, there is just a bit of an issue here. And that's the fact that George Joestar was born in 1898. Making George Joestar 113 years old during the events of Jojolion. And Flashback Man clearly isn't 113 years old. He looks to be around 20 or 30 or something like that. So unless George Joestar is a rock human, with it being very unlikely, the only way I see George Joestar being this man is if it were a theoretical part of him, but I feel like we can probably look for a better answer on who Flashback Man is at the moment. Well, if that isn't really likely, I think that it might be likely that Flashback Man is something that will be introduced in Jojolion chapter 107. Specifically the fusion of Jobin and Tooru. Currently, Jobin and Tooru are heavily injured, and Kato just returned after a while. The Higashikata house estate is also pretty close to the Wall Eyes, so it is possible that Kato can just bury the two of them and then bam, Flashback Man. And this would mean that the flashback isn't necessarily a flashback, but just Josuke seeing the future. But then this asks why Josuke can see the future in the first place, which would probably have to be someone's stand. Possibly Daya's, maybe. And the shot of Josuke looking up at Flashback Man does seem pretty likely in this scenario. So yeah, I would say this one is pretty plausible. Well, let's stay on Tooru actually. If this guy isn't a fusion, then I think it's likely that he is actually the supplier of rock insects, aka the father of Tooru. This would mean that Flashback Man is a rock human, and he does seem to be an age where he could be the father of Tooru. Flashback Man here is the one giving all of the rock insects to Tooru, which is how Tooru has so many of them. But how does Flashback Man get the rock insects in the first place? Well, he actually makes them himself, with his stand Dr. Worm, by They Might Be Giants. I think this one is honestly the most plausible so far, and it would be really nice to see Tooru and his father reunite. Now, we've just been looking in the sphere of Jojolion, and I guess post-SBR, pre-Jojolion with George Joestar, but eh. But how about we think all the way back to SBR, or Steel Ball Run, which is the 7th part of JoJo. it's pretty likely that Flashback Man is just a descendant of one of these other characters. So how about we just look at a few of them? Let's start with Diego Brando. I think this one is actually fairly likely, since not only does Flashback Man have the same long hair as Dio, but look at how this shot is framed. Gappy is looking above to Flashback Man, and being at the top is something that is very familiar to the Brandos. So obviously, Flashback Man has the characteristics and overall charisma of the other main Brandos. And it would also give us a Dio influence in this part, which is something that we haven't seen yet. And so far, Jojolion is the only part to not give us any sort of Dio influence. Since parts 1, 3, and 7 have Dio himself, 4, 5, and 6 show the effects of him through the story, and 2 takes us to the history of Dio's vampire powers with the Pillarmen. So maybe part 8 will just have a descendant of Dio. However, there are other candidates too. Maybe my viewers, but only 3.7% of them subscribe, so please subscribe. But also, Steven and Lucy Steele, since they did seem to have normal lives as you can have for being main characters in a JoJo part, and 100 years is a lot of time to make it in Japan, it is pretty likely that Flashback Man is just a descendant of these two, and is most shown by the fact that Lucy seems to still do some stuff, and Johnny is doing stuff in Japan. So, you know, Japan is a likely place for Lucy Steele and maybe her descendants to be in, maybe. But besides those, there isn't really anyone else we can talk about here. Maybe Funny Valentine and Gyro went down and dirty with some other people. But Funny's descendants would definitely have to be patriotic, and Gyro already has a descendant in Rai, or at least he might be. Look at this video. And that's kind of where everyone else doesn't make much sense. Johnny is only shown having another daughter, and Flashback Man is clearly a guy, and other Steel Ball Run characters like Hot Pants and Sandman, having him as a descendant doesn't really change the plot around in any way. Or, you know, he could just be Johnny himself, but the design change, in my opinion, is too drastic for that to happen. However, mark my words, Flashback Man will be the main villain, or at least the final fight in all of Jojolion.